Hello and welcome back to Superliminal Podcast. I know it's been a while. The last one was with Gareth Ike back in October of 2025, and I had planned just to take a couple of months off, and that 2 months actually turned into about 6 months. So for those of you who have been waiting, of which I know there are several, as I've had a few direct messages about that, who've been waiting for a new video, thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for sticking with the channel. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that we are back, and I've got some really fabulous guests lined up, and they'll be much more regular during the course of this year. Probably about once every couple of weeks, but I will try and get some extras in whenever I can. So thank you for your patience, and it's really, really good to be back on the channel. So today's guest is the wonderful Brad Olsen, who's done so much interesting research into Antarctica. And he's one of the very few Antarctica researchers who's actually been down there of his own volition and at his own expense, and has uncovered some really, really interesting information. And he's written about 11 books through his publishing company, CCC Publishing, which you can find out more information there if you're interested in his work. But what I really wanted to get Brad on the show for was because you might be asking, what's Antarctica got to do with our everyday lives? Well, actually, for those of us who are awakening, I don't think any of us is truly awake as such, but is in the process of awakening, it's actually got everything to do with it, because it covers lost civilizations, it covers extraterrestrials, it covers hidden technology, it covers the Third, Fourth and Fifth Reich and the Nazis, who actually did win World War II. Yes, you heard that right, they actually did, and Brad goes some way to explain that in a little section towards the end of the conversation. But most of all, it was just a really fun conversation. I love Brad's energy and the way he communicates it. And I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. So I'll end it there. And just before I go and we jump into the main video, please do remember to like, comment, share, so I can get as many people as possible in front of Brad and his wonderful information. So to all my regulars, thank you. I really do love and appreciate your patience, and thank you for staying with me whilst I've had this extended break. But yeah, we're back. I'm really looking forward to getting some great episodes out to you during the course of this year. I will stop there and see you in a second. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Superliminal. And as I said in the introductory video, it's been a little while. I didn't intend to have such a long break from the podcast, but now that I'm back, what better guest to kick off the show again for 2026 than Brad Olsen? So obviously I've shared in the intro video a bit about Brad and what he does. So let's dive straight in. And Brad, thank you ever so much for joining me on Superliminal, and it's a real honor to have you here.
Hey, Franco, it's really nice to make your acquaintance and be a guest on Superliminal as well.
Thank you. So, Brad, we were saying off camera that, clearly you've done some phenomenal work around what's going on in Antarctica and the true history of what's down there, and how that informs and impacts the world that we live in terms of the wisdom and knowledge that's been hidden from us, which sadly is a common theme when you begin to scratch below the surface. But I wondered if we could start with you telling us about your sort of origin story in terms of where you were born, what happened as you were growing up, and how on earth you ended up doing this phenomenal work, because I'm guessing it wasn't something that was on your mind when you were like 15, 16.
No, it wasn't, but I grew up in the Midwest, in the suburbs of Chicago and around the Great Lakes area, which is beautiful, but there's really no mountains there. And wasn't until we started doing ski trips with my dad out to Colorado and elsewhere, seeing, wow, there's big mountains and oceans and a lot more to the world than the Midwest. So I kind of had the travel bug from the time I was pretty young. And then when I finished college, I painted houses and paid for my first trip to Europe. and spent 3 months over there, kind of getting my toes wet, trying out backpacking and really liking it, and then finding that it didn't have to be 3 months, that Australians and Kiwis are always telling me, 3 months, mate, we've been on the road for 3 years. So then
Yeah.
I took that to heart, and some years later, I got a job teaching English in Japan, and then self-financed a 3-year trip around the world after Japan. And so that got my toes wet with the rest of the world, and then started my publishing business, 30 years now, and did a whole series on sacred places books, mostly travel guides. I started out in travel, and then about 10 years ago pivoted into esoteric subjects. And then 7 years ago, I had an opportunity to go down to South America and Antarctica, and then finalize the last 7 continents of the world. And it was on that trip to Antarctica that I started writing the script for my first conference presentation, but that information came over into this book, Secrets of Antarctica.
Wow, that's phenomenal. So, how did you end up actually getting on the boat and going down there? Because there aren't many people that get on a boat and go to Antarctica. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's a story in and of itself. Well, I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we drove a car that I bought in South America, a Ford Expedition, and it was all outfitted for camping in the back. And we drove all the way down to Ushuaia, Argentina, with the express interest of getting possibly on a cruise ship. But then we found out that you could also get on a sailboat for about the same price, but for twice as much time. And so we opted for a sailboat, found one who had room for us too. And then we set off in late January 2019, little knowing that at the end of 2019, COVID would start. And in fact, it was not possible to go to Antarctica in the coming years during COVID. So we luckily got on, and crossing the Drake Passage, boy, that was the hardest trip I've ever taken because I was seasick for 3 days. I think I lost 25 pounds on that trip. But as far as I know, I'm the only researcher in this field who has self-financed a trip down there to look into these big picture questions. What exactly is going on? Is there evidence for these 3 large ships under the ice and pyramids poking through and other paranormal questions? And so I set up a line of questions at every base that I went to, and even in the Ushuaia Yacht Club, and that is asking, do you know about these 3 motherships that were called Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria by the NSA some years ago? Gave them that nickname. Nope, didn't hear about that. Do you know about the pyramids or any megalithic structures being uncovered? Nope, people didn't hear about that. Any paranormal sightings or UFO? That one I got a little bit from someone on a base in Argentina, that they had seen a UFO sighting on another base, but they were talking about it within their base. So got a little bit on that, and then found out that there are huge no-fly zones in certain parts of Antarctica, which is somewhat strange when you consider that the Antarctica Treaty, which was formulated in the late 1950s and then fully ratified in 1961, has it in the charter that the entire continent would be open for scientific work or for travel exploration, but parts of it are certainly closed off. So that's what got me started, and then realizing, boy, there's so much more to it. And that's what started as a conference presentation, went into this book, and now I've got another conference presentation that I'm giving, including next month in Germany, where a lot of
Oh
this
wow.
has to do with the Nazis in Antarctica and the
Yeah.
U-boats getting deep underneath the ice. So we'll see how that is received when I get to Germany and give this talk.
Oh, fascinating. Will any of that be available publicly at all?
I
Snippets of
hope
it?
so. I don't know yet if they're recording it or releasing it or if it's going to be a live stream, but I hope so.
Yeah, yeah, that would be super interesting to be in Germany talking about the historical German record, as it were, because I believe one of your researchers is German. Is that right?
He speaks German and he can read and communicate in German.
Okay.
He came to me a year ago in the research phase of this book, and I was on another interview, and a Danish host said, "Hey, do you want to talk to this guy?" I said, "Of course I do." And we struck up quite a friendship, and he's might make it to this talk in Germany. But he then provided me with the lion's share of incredible research, including these maps for U-boat captains to take their submarines underneath the ice in World War II. And I've reprinted them, and they're just
Wow.
absolutely fascinating. And we all know how Germans are. If they say, you dive 56.3 meters, that's exactly what they mean. And then, so the written directions, you have Agartha written out
Ah,
by name. So they're
fascinating.
going for some mythical land under the ice. And so this just opened up whole new levels of research and getting into these documents that were provided, and just it's absolutely phenomenal how it all ties in to this
Yeah, it really
larger.
is. Yeah. One of the first questions that I have for you, Brad, is the ice wall versus ice shelf question, because I know you have an interesting view on that.
Sure. Well, let's just define our terms. A
Yeah.
wall presumes it goes straight down to the ground and is even buried in the ground, where an ice shelf is hollow underneath. And one of the big stories that came out of Antarctica this year was they put a submersible underneath the ice shelf, I think in Wilkes Land, and they saw millions of ice fish nests well deep under the ice shelf. So it's absolutely certain that many of these glaciers that come off the continent and create these ice shelves are hollow underneath. Now, the ice wall, well, there's really no evidence for that, that they go
Yeah.
straight down into the ground. And so that's one of the presumptions of a flat earth theory, is that we're surrounded on the outside by an ice wall and that there
Mm.
is no continent of Antarctica, so to speak. And I can say quite factually that's incorrect. And I've even got pictures here on my phone to show you of
Yeah.
stepping on terra firma down in Antarctica.
Right. And well, I'm glad we've cleared that that one up, because a good friend of mine is quite the flat earthist, which is surprising. Which has surprised me, because she's very aware in many other respects. I mean, I personally are of the same opinion that the flat Earth is most likely a psyop. But I mean that's
I
just
agree.
my
Yeah.
yeah, that's just my personal opinion. And before anyone starts getting keyboard warrior in the comments, it's just my opinion.
Right.
Brad, one of the interesting things about Antarctica is that there are historical cartographic representations of it, hundreds, if not thousands of years. I don't know about thousands, but certainly hundreds and hundreds of years old. In terms of it being on maps cartographically in a really high level of detail. What's the most credible explanation that you've come across for that?
Yeah, and I have a whole chapter on it called Maps of the Ancient Sea
Oh,
Kings. which was
Wonderful.
the name of Charles Hapgood's book. And I reference quite a few of the maps that he also discusses. The most famous one is the Piri-Reis map,
Mm.
where you can see the outline of Africa as well as South America. And then South America just blends down into the land where Antarctica is.
Yeah.
And so when you take that together with the liner notes, which are written on the side of the Piri-Reis map, where he says that this was based on source maps that come from the Library of Alexandria and also from Ptolemy. So you are correct in saying thousands of years old as well, as far as the reference of these source maps. But the Piri-Reis map is from 1513. And what I find so fascinating is in this area where Antarctica is today, you see the series of islands there.
Yeah.
That's under the Fitchner ice shelf. And it turns out by doing scans of the ice shelf that they found that these islands really do exist. And they're pretty much accurate on the Piri-Reis map. So that begs the question, how could he have known, or these older source maps known, the coastline of Antarctica free of ice? So then we're talking all the way back to the last ice age or before, when Antarctica may have been free of ice.
Yeah. In your opinion, in terms of the research that you've come across, if you were to proffer an opinion on that, what would you say it was?
How would they know about those islands? So I would offer that, yeah, those source maps are indeed thousands of years old, that there was some kind of seafaring civilization that Charles Hapgood also talks about that would have known the whole Arctic and Antarctic region. And I'll just read you what Charles Hapgood wrote in his book, because he analyzes dozens of maps, as do I. I've got a half a dozen maps of Antarctica, as you said, centuries before it was actually discovered in 1821. And Hapgood says most of the maps that he studies were of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, but most of the other areas survived. Those included maps of the Americas. Keep in mind, Columbus made his unique voyage in 1491, and yet many of these old maps also show portions of the Americas and maps of the Arctic and Antarctic seas. So Hapgood continues, it becomes clear that the ancient voyagers traveled from pole to pole. Unbelievable as it may appear, the evidence nonetheless indicates that some ancient people explored the coasts of Antarctica when its coasts were free of ice. It is clear, too, that they had instruments of navigation for accurately finding the longitudes of places that were far superior to anything possessed by the people of ancient, medieval, or modern times until the second half of the 18th century.
Wow.
So, taken from the master cartographer himself, that they knew the coastlines and what they were like well before the ice encompassed those areas.
Yeah, and of course that just blows out of the water what we've been told about history and what we've been told about civilization and what we've been told about where we come from and what our origin story is, because of course it's so much more complex than the simplistic version that we get indoctrinated with in school in the Western world. Because certainly here in the UK, I imagine it's very much the same as over in North America, where there's a very narrow story that, when you start to pick below the surface, doesn't even begin to start making sense. And then, of course, that begs the question: why is this happening? Why is this stuff being hidden from us? Because then we get into a conversation about what is it they're trying to hide from us, and why, what's down there? Why can't the public find out about it? Because in some of the notes that I made prior to our conversation,
one of the things I looked at was, and I think you did mention it briefly before, was the Antarctic treaty and suppression, because it restricts military activity and controls access to the rest of to the whole of the continent, really, apart from the very top part of it where you were able to visit yourself when you were there in 2019. What do you think is behind this treaty and the suppression?
Well, that's the big question, Franco, and I'll wager my best estimate is that this has to do with Operation Highjump. This has to do with what has happened after World War II, because it's well known that the Germans set up a colony called New Schwabenland. It's in an area called Queen Maud Land, and it's directly below South Africa in a region of Antarctica that was claimed by Norway. But the Germans set up shop there in a very public display of capturing this area and even saying that we're going to make a colony out of it. We're going to stay down here and we're going to set up shop. And here they are. This is a very publicized photo of them staking a claim. And this is their map of New Schwabenland, where they were going to claim this area for Germany, which they did. And as you recall, in our World War II history, the British cracked the Enigma code. And so they were able to spy and listen in on the U-boat submarines going down to Antarctica, as well as supply ships. So it wasn't just the Schwabenland expedition in 1938 and 1939, which was very well publicized and well known, which, by the way, was also a quest for anything occultic. And the reason I say that is these oak leaves, which are on the side of the badge for that Antarctic journey, which are the emblems that reveal the Thule Society paternity. So they were going down there to look for something occultic, hidden, and I would say that they found it. So this is kind of a long-winded answer to your question about why the Antarctica Treaty is the way it is and restricts certain areas. And it has to do with the British spying on the Germans during World War II and realizing that they're coming down there with a lot of stuff, that they're setting up not only a military base, but a science city called New Berlin. Yeah. And I've been able to identify 3 locations. So the first one was called Point 211. And then the other one was the New Berlin City. And then there's a third called the Thule Refuge, or Thule, Thule, depends how you pronounce it. And this one also has all underground, under the ice features. So they're very well hidden, very well protected. Admiral Byrd makes his 4th trip down there in Operation Highjump. They say it was a training exercise, but why do you have to bring 4,700 troops? Why do you have to bring aircraft carriers and destroyers? And he says in a military briefing, public briefing too, that his mission was military in nature. So he goes down there and really what he was meant to do was seek and destroy any German colony or bases they could find, as well as come back with 2 UFO crafts. So they knew that they had at least 2. And this is my representation of what happened in the Battle of Highjump, where these UFOs come up out of the water, attack Byrd. It's a very one-sided battle. They lose 1 destroyer. They could have taken out the whole fleet, but it was just a show of force. So Byrd goes back to America and he tells the Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio, quotes him as saying that we would be faced with a new enemy that could fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. So Byrd gets back. He's given a gag order. He's put in quarantine. He really can't speak of it for the rest of his life. But nonetheless, U.S. gets routed in Highjump. And so they know that the Germans have this high technology. So his good buddy was also the head of the DoD at the time, the Department of Defense, and he was known to be stalking the halls of the Pentagon, saying, "The Nazis are down there, and we can't get them out of there." And here's a picture with James Forrestal when Byrd gets back. He's giving him a stuffed penguin. And then James Forrestal is committed to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and he's suicided out the top window. It's
thrown off the top floor, wasn't he, Forrestal?
Yeah, the first casualty in the UFO cover-up.
Yeah.
So the U.S. knows we got a big problem on our hands. Byrd gets routed in Highjump. Forrestal is trying to get the word out to the people, but the military's not having it. And so the Germans are still down there. They're still in place. They still have their science city in New Berlin. And then the unthinkable happens, and that is a huge flyover in Washington, D.C. And at the time, most people would say, well, geez, we're getting UFOs flying over the Capitol and we can't do anything about it. Well, I think Byrd would have known exactly who they were. They were able to fly pole to pole at incredible speeds, and they fly over the most sensitive airspace in the world. Here's all the newspaper headlines and the famous photo of these crafts. Those are the craft that can fly pole to pole at an incredible speed. So now I set up the scenario. The Germans are still down there. They're still operating in these locations in New Schwabenland, and they sue for peace. Because after the flyover, Truman is still president in July 1952. And they basically say, look, we can fly right over the Pentagon, the White House, and the Capitol building, and you can't do anything about it. So we don't want you coming back down here for another Operation Highjump, and let's sue for peace. But one other thing happens before the Antarctica Treaty, and that is the U.S. tries to dislodge them one more time using nuclear bombs in Operation Argus. And so then this happens in 1958, and they did some very top secret, high altitude nuclear bomb explosions. I think they were bombing New Schwabenland. If I'm ever given the opportunity to go back down there, I'd bring a couple of Geiger counters to New Schwabenland. If we can find their radioactivity, that might conclude that we did nuke New Schwabenland. And I bring that up because one of the first tenets of the Antarctica Treaty is you are not allowed to do any nuclear bombing or testing in Antarctica as per the Antarctica Treaty. Now, why would they go to such lengths to make that one of the most important aspects of the Antarctica Treaty unless they already did it? So then the Antarctica Treaty begins right after Operation Argus. The Germans are still down there. They could not dislodge them because they're 2 miles below the ice. And then it says, well, but it's going to be open for science and tourism, but there are areas that you cannot go. And that is to protect these areas that are still sensitive to the Germans down there, which are still there to this day. And the reason I can say that is there was a book that was sent to Carrie Cassidy at Project Camelot called The New Berlin Base in German. And the guy starts out by saying he was born in a world under the ice domes. I should also mention that Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world. 14 known active volcanoes plus 93 known geothermal vents. So it would have the propensity to create these large under ice domes, and you'd have a fuel source. So the New Berlin book got translated into English. You can go to Project Camelot website and read it. It's very arcane mathematical formulas. It's very hard to get through, but it's interesting nonetheless. And also, most recently, you have Stuart Swerdlow, who says he's one of the last surviving people of the Montauk experiment. He says he has a friend. He's been doing interviews lately and saying that his friend is a German that lives down there still to this day, multi-generational. So he might be a grandson of some of the founders who originally set up the bases in New Schwabenland. And he tells Stuart Swerdlow that they would like to come out and tell the world that they're there, but they don't know how the world would feel about the Fourth Reich still being in existence. So I guess they're kind of in a trap in a way that they would like to tell the world, but they can't. So that's a roundabout way of what went into the Antarctica Treaty and what's still in effect in law. It's the oldest lasting treaty in the history of the world, modern world, still in effect today.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Brad. That was such a fascinating explanation, and it just I've got so many questions going off in my head with everything that you shared. So thank you for that.
Sure.
One of the key ones that comes up for me. I mean, people listening to this will be going, "What? Germans? Third Reich, Fourth Reich, even Fifth Reich, ET craft?" Well, turns out it's true, and there's all the evidence. I mean, Brad's researched so much of it, and there are others out there that have looked more at the German involvement with, shall we say, malevolent extraterrestrials that have helped them. But what I wanted to do, Brad, now is, if we rewind back to pre-Third Reich, pre-Nazis, pre-Hitler, in terms of him being the supreme leader of Germany, and take us back to Maria Orsich and the story around her, because that's really pivotal, isn't it, in terms of how the flow of technology and the flow of advancement went to the Germans, and that became the Third Reich, the Fourth Reich, Fifth Reich. Like George Kavasilis, who I've done some work with, shares a very, very interesting perspective in terms of, the Third Reich was Hitler and his crew. The Fourth Reich was basically Operation Paperclip. That went to the USA, which many people watching this will know about, and Antarctica. And then there's a Fifth Reich that have actually left the planet, and they're actually out doing all kinds of damage out in space. But we'll get onto that. So take us back to Maria Orsich and what her role was, because obviously anyway, I'll just shut up. Yeah, tell us about Maria Orsich.
Yeah. Oh, it's a huge part of this story, of course. And here they are. Maria Orsich and Segril of the Vril Society and the Vril and Thule Society are a huge part of this story of Antarctica, because they were able to telepathically convey the actual blueprints for zero-point energy craft, for free energy, for creating these large craft. And so the famous scientist Victor Schauberger, he takes a look at these blueprints that they're coming up with, and he says, this is actionable intelligence. We can work with this. Give us these blueprints. Let's turn it over to our engineers and scientists, and we can build this stuff. And they did. That's why at the end of World War II, when the Allies were making their way into Germany, they were very afraid that they would release these wonder weapons, as they were called, and just wipe out the Allies in their advance. And rightfully so, because when it comes to what they were building, not only very advanced UFO craft, but also they had the blueprints for a mothership called the Andromeda. And that's who the Vril women were communicating with. And so I have several different illustrations of some of the blueprints that the Germans were working on, including the Andromeda spacecraft itself, which could hold the Honeyboo and the Vril craft. So there was a huge data dump in in the 1990s to a German Englishman named Ralph Edel, and he just gets this whole stash of photos from the Germans testing their UFO during the war, and then even after the war, what they got out from Germany and sent down to not only Antarctica but South America, where they continued working. And they were all, the Germans, this is often overlooked, but were very advanced with submarine technology. When you think about it, submarines and spacecraft are very similar. You're working in very confined environments, compression, and being deep underwater or in outer space. And as you mentioned, that is the Fifth Reich. That is the secret space program of the Germans called Nachtwaffen, the Dark Fleet. And they have been in operation now for, I'd say, for decades. And if history were really to tell the truth about who was the first to the moon, who was the first to Mars and beyond, it would be the Germans, because they were working on this whole fleet of craft that could go off planet for decades, because the work continued after the war. And I went to, on my way down to Antarctica, I got close to some of these very large German compounds, which John Lear describes as micronations. They're so big, they're as big as some of our small states here in America. And they're all owned by Germans. You can't go there. So yeah, they're micronations within larger nations. Kind of like the Vatican City is in Rome, is in Italy, but it's its own country. They were able to set up a similar situation in Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. And so I got close to a couple of them in Argentina, one of them in an area called La Falda. And that's where the Eden Hotel was, where there's a 3-season series on the History Channel called Hunting Hitler. And of course, they did a couple episodes in La Falda. And I did the tour of the Eden Hotel. And afterwards, I asked the guy, do you really think that Adolf Hitler survived the war? He says, oh, I don't have to think it. I know it. I said, how do you know it? He said, well, right here in town, there's an elderly woman who is a teenager at the end of the war, and she was a chambermaid in the Eden Hotel, and she has a memory of Adolf Hitler, Eva Braun, and even their dog Blondie in this hotel. And he's like, of course he survived. And he lived until 1960 or 1961, and they had safe houses for him all throughout South America. But one of these micronations was near La Falda. And so nearby, there's this mountain. It's even written up in the Lonely Planet as being where all these UFO sightings are taking place. So girlfriend at the time and I said, oh, let's go do night watch. Let's see if we can see anything. We did. It's in this little town in the mountains called Monte Uraturco. And so we hung out there. We were watching. We didn't see anything. But then I get back to the States, and I talked to my friend David Hatcher Childress, one of the stars on Ancient Aliens. And he says, Brad, those weren't alien UFOs. Those were German UFOs. You don't think the real UFOs would leave burn holes on the ground and abduct people like they said in Lonely Planet? Okay. It's like, that's an underground base. That's one of the locations where they are backward engineering and continued to work on these craft. So again, they're still down there in South America too. And this is the Fourth Reich in the world, but leading to this Fifth Reich that late goes off planet.
Yeah, because I went backpacking in South America many years ago with
Oh,
my
cool.
wife at the time, and we were really struck at what a massive German influence there was in
Oh, yeah.
Argentina. And I mean, I was completely asleep to all of this at the time, but we both noticed, like, why are there so many Germans here, and why is there such a strong German influence? And never thought anything of it until I began to get interested in all this fascinating information. I was like, oh, that really makes sense, because then, of course, as you said, Brad, it's easily provable that Hitler and many other members of the Third Reich at a senior level were down there. And it's really easy to prove. But going back to Maria Orsich, would you say that she was co-opted? I mean, I can't believe that she would have consciously done this and given the technology to the Third Reich. I imagine that her and the Vril Society probably had no choice. Very much like, what's the scientist's name again?
Victor Schauberger.
Schallberger, yeah. I imagine, yeah, they were co-opted and probably didn't have a choice in terms of handing over that information.
Yeah, and here's a picture of Victor Schauberger with some of his earliest plans for UFO type craft. And I think that's a perfect analyzation of what happened, because in post World War I Germany, the Germans were by far already the most adept engineers. So I would suggest that because they were talking telepathically with Aldebaran, which is a benevolent ET civilization, they thought, okay, well, Germany's peaceful now after World War I, the 1920s, and we'll give them this technology and hopefully they'll use it for peaceful means. Meanwhile, Adolf Hitler, Hess, Himmler, several of the top early Nazi founders were in the Thule Society, or Thule, depending on how you pronounce it. And they were very occultic along the same lines of what they're doing with the Vril Society. But yeah, I would say they were co-opted. They were brought into the fold under the Thule Society, and then these blueprints were turned over to the engineers to backward engineer. But it's interesting about the Vril women. They all but one disappeared, and the one that didn't became a whistleblower. And she said that they all chose to get on a craft called Die Glock, which is one of the most advanced craft that the Germans had developed. Not only was it essentially a spacecraft, but it was also a time machine. And Die Glock could then take the Vril women and Hans Kammler off planet, or perhaps to another time, which there is some speculation that a craft that came down in Mecklenburg, Pennsylvania, that went missing at the end of the war. This is Die Glock, and this is the Polish laboratory where they were working on it. Went missing, but then 40 years later, it turns up in Pennsylvania. And by then, we already had the wherewithal to go and collect any downed UFO with the NSA. No such agency, as it was originally nicknamed, but National Security Agency, was specifically tasked to clean up and cover up any crashed UFO. So I would suspect that they went and got it. But this is what's interesting about Maria Orsich, is that she was not on the Die Glock at the time, nor was Hans Kammler. Maybe it was on another assignment in Pennsylvania, if even that was Die Glock. But they are said, even Maria Orsich to this day is supposedly still alive in the base in Antarctica. Yeah. You've heard that?
So I'm guessing that from the bits that I've gleaned about Maria Orsich, which isn't a huge amount, is In your opinion, Brad, would you say she probably was one of the Aldebaran people herself?
Well, she was born in Germany, as was Sigril and some of the other women. But perhaps
Okay.
I believe in past lives or lives that can continue as an earthling, but their spirit was Aldebaran. Perhaps that's the connection there. But
Yeah.
must have some kind of anti-aging or longevity technology in Antarctica to keep Maria alive, because she's well into her 130s by now.
Mhm.
So she'd be an elderly woman, but apparently she still is quite the beauty, as she always was,
Yeah.
and still has her hair growing long.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. We can't talk about the Nazis and the technology, albeit we've discussed how people like Maria in the Real Society were taken into that probably against their own will, without bringing into the conversation the reptilian connection, the Draco reptilian connection with the Nazis. What do you know about that, and how does that interface with this conversation about the Fourth Reich, Antarctica, and what has unfolded since then? And especially, I guess,
Yeah,
high
and
jump as
that's
well was a
that's
significant part of high jump.
for sure. And it's still not known whether it was German UFOs or reptilian UFOs that attacked Bird's Armada in high jump. That's still an open question, who was piloting those craft. But
Yeah.
the Germans did turn to the dark side with a dark, malevolent ET group in the pre-war years. And it was always to get more technology. They felt like they could get more technology, especially that could be converted into battle-ready type craft, such as these Honeyboo craft that were outfitted with laser-like guns that they could use to defeat the Allies. And then they were always trying to be the very top in the technological pecking order, and they were. They believed in quality because they knew that they didn't have the numbers to fight the Russians or the rest of the Allies. So they needed to be the best with technology and the best in training. So how it ties into the reptilians is somewhere along the line, they made an alliance with the dark malevolent ETs, that being the reptilians and the Greys. And that's when I think the transmissions from the Aldebaran shut off. But it was already too late because they had much of the blueprints already. And then working with the reptilians, they made that Faustian bargain, the deal with the devil, basically, that they said, well, we're going to conquer the world, and we want you guys to help. You'll be our boots on the ground, and we'll give you 25% of control. We get the rest. And the Germans went along with it. And they were even given the location for Base 211 as a reptilian base in Antarctica that was no longer being used. They just said, here's where it is. It's empty. Go have it. You can co-opt it. And that's in New Schwabenland as well. So what's also interesting about that too is, do you remember about 15 years ago, there was the stampede in Mecca, Saudi Arabia? There was hundreds of people that died. They said it was a stampede, but that kind of doesn't make sense, because why would you stampede? But the real backstory was they had discovered something called the Ark of Gabriel when they were doing an excavation in Mecca about 15 years ago. And when they uncovered it, it's kind of like the Ark of the Covenant, that it released this huge amount of energy. And that's what killed the hundreds of people. They just had to use a cover story and say it was a stampede. So then the Saudis were faced with this problem. Well, millions of people come to Mecca every year, and we've got this Ark of Gabriel that was uncovered. And what are we going to do with it? And they put the word out to several nations, and only Russia decided that they could handle it. And it's well-known fact that a fleet of ships comes to Jeddah, the port on the Red Sea, Saudi Arabia, and they were able to handle it, they were able to enclose it and take it on these ships to Antarctica, to another defunct reptilian base, where it resides to this day. And then you have the patriarch Kirill, who is the top-ranking patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, kind of like our Pope in Catholic Church. He goes down to Antarctica, but he goes to meet Pope Francis when he's on tour in Cuba right before that trip. And they, not known what they discussed, but it probably the Ark of Gabriel. And so Patriarch Kirill goes down there to bless a small chapel, but supposedly his presence was required in order to move the Ark of Gabriel into this defunct base of the Reptilians, where it remains to this day. So there's all kind of religious connotations as well as what might be going on down there. And of course, I write them up and put them in this book, and I have references to all of these stories. So if people want to look them up, they're more than welcome to. And I give you the books or the website where more of these can be referenced.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Brad. One of the things that you've talked about in the book is black goo and transhumanism. And I'm fascinated about that. So for anybody who's listening who might not know what that is, could you tell us a bit about that and given what's happening in this world of ours at the moment, which is very, very significant in terms of the reptilians, in terms of the grey aliens, in terms of this whole transhumanist and AI agenda that's going on, which is hugely, hugely important for the whole of human society and how it impacts the world and our future and the interconnection of us with our planet and with the natural world. Tell us about what you've discovered.
Sure. Well, you have to go back to the Falkland War of 1982, which, of course, was the British Navy going down to the Southern Ocean. This is a map from Wikipedia. A lot of people don't know that it broke off into two fighter groups. One of them, of course, went to fight the famous war in Falklands, which I don't know about you, but it just made no sense to me at the time. Why do we have to go? Why did the British have to send so much material down there to take these small islands that have more sheep than people?
Yeah.
And
I was
very
like
one-sided, as you know.
Yeah, I was like an 8-9-year-old kid at the time when this happened. And I remember thinking, because my stepfather was absolutely glued to it because he'd been in the UK's merchant navy, which is like the supply navy to the main navy.
Right.
And because he just was glued to it on the TV, and, you know, this is back in the days where you literally had, in the UK, had like 3 channels and that was it. So you didn't have a choice but to watch it. And I remember thinking at the time, this is really weird. What's going on with these 2 tiny little islands?
Yeah. And you would think, why would the UK make such a big statement to get down there? And in fact, the surrender terms were signed on this ship right off of South Thule Island,
Wow.
which is midway between Antarctica and the Falklands. This is what it looks like from the satellite. And you can see right here, a little portion of it is gray-screened by Google. They don't want you to see where the actual base was, which is what it looked like when the British got there. And the 8 scientists from Argentina put up a white flag of surrender. They were studying down there, but this was called Operation Keyhole. It was that second attack group that goes all the way down through the South Sandwich Islands, and the surrender papers to end the Falkland Wars was signed right off of South Thule Island. So what was so dang important to the British to take all these islands, most of which were not even occupied or populated.
Mhm.
But they get down there and they take the base over and then they blow it up. Like, really? What was that all about? So then they send down another frigate and it collects the black goo. And this was stored in a cave. And when it's a perpetually frozen, as it is in South Thule Island, there's that word Thule again. It keeps popping up everywhere in this narrative of Antarctica. It turns out the Germans knew about this as well, and they had taken some of this black goo to their own cloning laboratories in Antarctica, where there are cloning labs that remote viewers have looked at and said are still in existence to this day. So what is the black goo? Well, it can rapidly clone anything. It is a sentient fluid that can basically be used to not only create rapidly produced clones, but if ingested, it can make you a super soldier. So I was just in the UK in December at the Bases project with Miles Johnston, who's one of the leading advocates about the black goo. And he's had David Griffin and Harold Kotzvela on his show, who also speak about the black goo. And I have an interview with Miles Johnston in the book where I asked him further questions about the black goo. And he's had other whistleblowers on the show who are actually part of the Special Boat Service, the SBS sea version that went down to collect the black goo. And I'll just read this portion of it with you, that after the Falkland Wars, the Argentinian who were removed from the base were working with a ET species called the blue grays. SAS and Royal Marine Commandos, including this whistleblower named John, who's part of it, went down there to get this sentient oil, which was slightly brown. If you put your finger near it, the sentient oil would rise up to touch. It wants to join with anything that's alive. And he said that on my ship there were 400 interlocking barrels. And then he also was tainted with it and was getting special treatment at a U.S. hospital, similar to Barry King's father, who discovered the strange lab close to the war in Europe. People that got in close to it and got too much in them, they either went insane or committed suicide. And so it was taken back after the Falkland Wars to the Marconi laboratories. And that's where all these very strange deaths occur that were working with it. The Third Reich, which took over the U.S., I'm just reading my interview with Miles here, was then part of the Fourth Reich. Anyways, Thule is the base in Germany used on its way to and from Antarctica. So the Germans were the first to go there. And as we know, the Argentinians were very sympathetic to the German cause and allowed them to set up quite a few bases in Argentina. The surface lab was completely destroyed. I just showed you pictures of that. The destroyers pounded it with shells. The deep sections blew up by John and his commandos. The Argentinians did rebuild it. They go back out there. They wanted to keep going. So then the UK had to return and completely tear it down and kick all the last ones out. The oil was worked on by Marconi scientists. Some were given to Boots civilian labs. The rest, such as the number of deaths, is known. John used it to do CE6 contact night watches up in east of Golden Ball Hill. One night, the cops were called on the event stopped. It looked over the Rothschild estate where they have their spaceship summer home called Wake of Pewsley. Then my question was, Is it being used in an anti-human depopulation agenda? Miles said, Brad, it's the Fabians who are running this, possibly accessed by the Velon, and this is their entire agenda. No humans by 2050. The sentient oil as distilled from meteors is extraterrestrial. It is not compatible with the terrestrial sentient oil of Earth. I said, final question. This is fantastic info, Miles. Is the sentient oil on Earth benevolent? Can it be used for rapid cloning? And he said, it's what makes you. It's in crude oil. It has communication. We are either part of the solution or part of the problem. We remove the toxin invasion or they will. All of us with it, no excuses. So at this conference with Miles Johnson in December, I was on a panel with several people from the German Nachtwaffen who had memory of being in space, of doing this. That is Penny Bradley and Drago Reed. And my question to them is, were you given some of the black goo? And said, both of them said, yes, we were. It was part of the protocol.
Wow.
So they would be given a small dose of this black goo, not enough to drive them crazy or want to be suicidal, but enough that would make them give them much more stamina, they said, and also to be able to live in these pressurized environments as part of the Nachtwaffen fleet. So that's what the British war in the Falklands was all about, was to extract this black goo, to bring it back, and to try to backward engineer it. But unfortunately, it has gotten loose. It has escaped. And now it is also being weaponized. And I would say it's being sprayed upon us in the chemtrails because it's popping up all over the place in all these weird new diseases of the 21st century, most notably Morgellons syndrome, which are these fibers that are growing and coming out of people's skin. Yeah. It's only been diagnosed since the beginning of this century, and doctors still don't know what to do about it. And it's very similar to the graphene oxide, which was in these things, as well as in the ferrofluids, and it's being used by our DARPA as backward engineering too, because they, for some reason, want to get us all injected with this stuff. So this is where the rabbit hole goes really deep, Franco. But
it's funny you say that, Brad, because as you're sharing this, I'm like, oh my goodness, we need another 6 hours on this topic alone. But yeah, it is such a huge one. But that is the first time I've ever heard that explanation for the Falklands War with the UK, and it absolutely, given the little bits that I know from here, there, and everywhere, it's really sort of connected quite a few dots and makes perfect sense. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, because it's something I'm gonna have a look into a bit further, because yeah, we are living in the most insane times at the moment with this transhumanist agenda and the whole depopulation thing that is so evidently going on. If you just, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. It's become so obvious. So Brad, I've got to think about, I could talk to you for hours and hours, because, I love the way you share the information with such enthusiasm. And it's fascinating. And, clearly your level of wisdom and information around this subject is second to none. But before we jump into the quickfire questions, the final question I really wanted to ask you is, if full disclosure about Antarctica happened tomorrow in terms of what you found and what's going on down there, what do you think would be the biggest world-altering revelation? And do you think humanity is ready for that revelation?
Well, on the back of the book, I say all roads lead to Antarctica. Of course, no roads lead to Antarctica, but I think it means that all of these topics in the disclosure field from secret space program to under ice bases, both of extraterrestrial and Fourth Reich Nazis, and everything that has to do with this high technology. You can find one of these roads leading to Antarctica. So I've often said on interviews that disclosure could very well come from Antarctica. So just one of these massive ships under the ice that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Nina, Pinta, or Santa Maria, and I've been able to locate at least two of them. One of them happens to be in New Schwabenland, and it's a seasonal base called Conan that in the year 2013, they were doing an excavation of it and found what looks like a giant, massive craft under the ice. And I have a chapter in the book called Antarctica ETs, and this is what it looks like. If you go to the Wayback Machine, and there's the GPS coordinates, that's what you'll find. That's what they're digging up in 2013. Now that it looks like this, so you have to go to the Wayback Machine to see them excavating it. But it looks like they covered it over with a giant tarp, and it's still there. Then the other one that I could say with a fair amount of certainty is located on the Beardmore Glacier. And this is what Linda Moulton Howe, who is also very instrumental in my research of this book, her interview with Spartan 1, who got into this massive craft, partially submerged on the Beardmore Glacier. And he talked about how it was filled with glyphs, including the black sun, which is one of the most occultic symbols of the Third Reich.
Yeah.
And there it is on the wall in this giant basalt black UFO craft. So I'd say that's Nina and Pinta. The third, Santa Maria, I've not conclusively been able to place, but I have a lot of pictures in the book with GPS coordinates of things like discs partially submerged in the ice, or there's another image of the Conan base and the excavation in 2013, or other wreckage, very anomalous wreckage. I mean, that is not natural. That's not just some rock formation. That is something that was built and is still there, visible on the surface. And then what's below the ice is kind of like the deepest depths of the ocean, the last unexplored areas of the world. And some of those places, you have what they're doing in Egypt last year, scanning the Giza Plateau. You're getting the same kind of findings when they're scanning below the ice in Antarctica, and you're getting these readings of what look like cities under the ice. It's truly remarkable that there are these cityscapes that are being detected, and even NASA's calling them up and saying, Antarctica, NASA images reveal traces of ancient human settlements beneath the ice 3.5 kilometers down. So what do you make of this? That Antarctica is the possible disclosure to the world that we've had some kind of link up or meeting, or perhaps they want to just stay hidden down there. And that would be the best place to do it.
Is humanity ready for the revelation of what's down there, do you think?
Well, I think we are. And it's long overdue. We're all grown-ups now. We can handle the truth.
Yeah.
It might be a very dark truth. It might be that we've been manipulated, manhandled, abducted, cloned, all kinds of things. But nonetheless, I think we really have to come face to face with the extraterrestrial reality here on Earth, no matter how dark it is.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. And it's as you said, so overdue. We can't continue with, and I don't think that the people that do try and hide it can continue to keep hiding it. The crack. It's a bit like, when the water starts to leak here, and then you put your finger in it, and then it's leaking over there, and it's leaking over there, and it starts leaking over there. I think it's just to use the expression we talked about earlier, it's the ice wall that's just ready to burst and for the water to overflow. Brad,
the little Dutch boy can't hold it back any
yeah,
longer.
exactly. This has been such an incredible conversation, and as I said earlier, I could continue for hours. So, but we're going to have to wrap it up. So, I just wanted to very quickly ask you 3 quick fire questions that I always finish the conversation on. The first one is, what are you most excited about right now that you're working on?
Well, I'm working on my 12th book, which is called Underwater Archaeology, which shows dozens of locations around the world with megalithic structures, with other buildings that are underwater. Now, how do you build an underwater megalithic structure unless it had once been above water? So again, we're talking about pre-Ice Age constructions, and this book should be great too when I get it out in about 2 years. It takes me about 3 years to finish a book. And I've been doing so many interviews and conferences right now. I've not worked on it as much as I'd like to, but I'm going to get back into it real soon. So I'm excited about the new book.
Brilliant. That sounds fascinating. We talked about time machines earlier, briefly. If you could jump back in a time machine and there in front of you when the doors open is 12-year-old Brad, what one piece of advice would you give that young boy?
Hey, just follow your heart and do what you feel like you should be doing at the time of your life, and everything's going to work out just fine. And I would say I took that advice.
Beautiful. I love that. And finally, in your opinion, what's the number one thing that's wrong with the world, and what do you think the solution for that is?
Yeah, and that's a big question, and we could probably fill a whole show with that, because one of my books is called Beyond Esoteric: Escaping Prison Planet, and that is one of the big challenges. How do we escape? And it's not to say that Earth is anything more than just a gem of a planet, a beautiful location, but it's the constructs that have kept us in this prison planet that I would like to offer solutions on how to escape.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would highly recommend anybody who's resonated with that response, go read the book. So finally, as we close off then, Brad, where can people find you? What courses, events, your website, any social media or anything like that? And where are your books?
Yeah, thanks. BradOlsen.com to find out more about me, other projects I'm working on, and my conference schedule, which is now underway. And I've got 2 that I'm going to this month, 3 in the month of May, including Contact in the Desert down in Palm Springs, as well as flying out to Germany for the ultimate UFO conference, where I'll be giving this talk about Germans under the ice to a German audience. And then I'm flying back to Europe in June for the Bosnian Pyramid Conference with Billy Carson and Dr. Sam.
So and Dr. Sam,
looking forward to that.
That'll be amazing.
It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I'd love to get on the show as well.
Yeah, I can probably help you with that.
Thank you.
And then going to and then Dr. Sam too. Probably he's going on a tour right now in the U.S. speaking tour, and then he's going back to Bosnia. But to find out my books and other authors that I publish, go to cccpublishing.com. But unfortunately, I can't send books to the UK right now. But they are available through Nexus Magazine and Gazelle Distribution, because the tariffs have just made it 4 times the cost of the book to send it.
Yeah.
But they are available elsewhere if people want to check that out.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Brad. Well, Honestly, this has been such a wonderful conversation that could go in so many different directions. So perhaps at some point later this year, we could explore some of the points that have come up today in a future conversation. But for now, Brad, I want to thank you so much for coming on to Superliminal. It really has been such an honor to have you here. I've really enjoyed your vibrancy and the information that you've shared, and I hope that everybody listening has really helped to shift their awareness in terms of understanding what's really going on in this world, and how our history has been completely and utterly concealed to us. But Brad, thanks ever so much for coming on the show. It's been really, really great to have you.
Oh, my pleasure. And yeah, let's definitely do it again. And if we do it later on this year, I'll let you know how that presentation was well received in Germany or not.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. I'm sure it will be. I don't doubt it. And as always, thank you ever so much to everybody listening and watching. Thank you for your continued support. And as I said earlier, it's really great to be back. I had a bit of a longer break than I'd anticipated, but thank you, as always, especially to my regular watchers. So please do like, comment, and share. It does help with the algorithm. But for now, thanks again, and we will see you in the next conversation. Bye for now. Thanks a lot, Brad, and thanks, everyone.